Now it's time for the last word with my friend Jonathan Capehart, who's in for Lawrence. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Alex. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Today at the White House, you saw global leadership from the President of the United States. President Biden unveiled a tranche of more than 500 new sanctions against Vladimir Putin's Russia after the death of Putin's chief political opponent, Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny died as a political prisoner in Russia, and U.S. officials have blamed Vladimir Putin for that repeatedly.
Make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Alexei's death.
This would be a further sign of Putin's brutality. Whatever story they tell, let us be clear, Russia is responsible.
The fixation and fear of one man only underscores the weakness and rot at the heart of the system that Putin has built. Russia's responsible for this.
And today at the White House, you saw the President of the United States responding to that with the largest single package of sanctions against Russia since the invasion of Ukraine, unveiling expansive, major new sanctions that, quote, deny Russia the resources necessary to support its brutal war against Ukraine. The Treasury Department is, quote, designating targets, including a major cog in Russia's financial infrastructure, more than 24 third country sanctions evaders in Europe, East Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, and hundreds of entities in Russia's military-industrial base and other key sectors. The State Department announced that they are, quote, sanctioning 3 individuals in connection with the death of Navalny in Russian penal colony IK3, the prison warden, regional prison head, and deputy director of the Federal Penitentiary Service of Russia.
The people of Ukraine remain unbowed and unbroken in the face of Putin's vigorous onslaught. This is due to their sheer bravery and their sacrifice, but it's also due to us. Remember, the United States pulled together a coalition of more than 50 nations to support Ukraine. We unified and expanded NATO. We can't walk away now. And that's what Putin is betting on. He's betting on we're going to walk away. We in the United States are going to continue to ensure that Putin pays the price for his aggression abroad and repression at home.
President Biden's commitment to NATO stands in stark contrast to the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, who said that Russia could do, quote, whatever the hell they want to NATO countries who don't pay enough for defense. You saw even more of this global leadership yesterday, when the President of the United States visited the widow and daughter of Alexei Navalny in California. And on the other side of the political divide, you saw Donald Trump compare his $500 million legal woes of his own making to the brutal death of Alexei Navalny.
Navalny is a very sad situation, and he's very brave. He was a very brave guy because he went back. He could have stayed away. But it's happening in our country, too. We are turning into a communist country in many ways. And if you look at it, I'm the leading candidate. I get indicted. I never heard of being indicted before.
That wasn't even the first time Donald Trump made the comparison. He's now said something like this repeatedly. Monday, on his bootleg social media site, he wrote, "The sudden death of Alexei Navalny has made me more and more aware of what is happening in our country." Donald Trump defrauded the state of New York and was found liable for that in a civil court. Donald Trump sexually abused and defamed E. Jean Carroll and was found liable for that in a civil court. Donald Trump has been indicted on charges that he orchestrated the hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels. Donald Trump has been indicted on charges related to the classified documents that he definitely had at Mar-a-Lago and refused to give back. We've all seen the photos of the boxes in the bathroom. Donald Trump has been indicted on charges for his actions on January 6th, when a riot definitely happened at the United States Capitol. Donald Trump has been indicted on charges in Georgia linked to his very real lies about the election and a plan to subvert the will of Georgia voters. That is, to use Donald Trump's own words, what is happening in our country. And to those legally appropriate actions are absolutely nothing like the tragic killing of Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny, who was jailed because he dared to oppose Donald Trump's favorite autocrat, Vladimir Putin. Alexei Navalny, who then died in a Russian prison from what the propagandists who work under Vladimir Putin's command called, quote, natural causes. President Biden sanctions Vladimir Putin for Alexei Navalny's death after visiting with his widow, a widow who, while still dealing with the grief from her husband's death, immediately pledged to the world, quote, I will continue the work of Alexei Navalny. That's what President Joe Biden does in the face of those facts. Donald Trump tries to make Alexei Navalny's death about himself, because Donald Trump tries to make absolutely everything about himself. How pathetic. How small. How craven must you be to do that? Joining us now, Edward Fishman, senior research scholar at Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy. He served as Russia sanction lead at the State Department and is a former policy planning staffer to then Secretary of State John Kerry. And Michael McFaul, who served as the United States ambassador to Russia from 2012 to 2014. He is an MSNBC international affairs analyst. Thank you both very much for being here. Edward, given that the sanctions are targeting companies that service the Russian military, how effective will these sanctions be in slowing down Russia's war effort?
Look, I think the Biden administration did a number of really important things today. You know, the 500 targets obviously is the headline. It's a big number. But I think the most important thing was really looking at the 24 companies based outside of Russia in places like China, Serbia, the UAE, Turkey, that have helped Russia evade sanctions and procure things like semiconductors for its war machine. The Biden administration has expanded sanctions now to cover these companies, these front companies that are importing chips from the United States, from Europe, and then reselling them onto Russia. So I think that that's a really important step, Jonathan. At the same time, I think it only has to be a first step. The Biden administration has come up with this new policy of secondary sanctions that the president put in an executive order in December. This is the first time that they're really going with a significant tranche of secondary sanctions, but we haven't seen sanctions against foreign banks, for instance, that are processing payments for Russia's war machine. And I think that kind of a step is going to be necessary to really cut the spigot of technology to the Russian military.
So you hinted at it, but are there even more sanctions coming down the pike? You just said a moment ago, this is the first step.
I do believe there are. I think the Biden administration is the highest commitment that they have on sanctions really are these sanctions that are focused on the Russian military, because those are the sanctions that really are having an impact in the here and now that actually could potentially help Ukraine get more momentum on the battlefield. I think the difficulty with those is that it does require what are called secondary sanctions. It's not about sanctioning Russian targets. We've already sanctioned pretty much the entire Russian military-industrial complex. It's about sanctioning companies in China, companies in Turkey or the UAE who are helping Russia get the equipment it needs for its military machine. I think the other thing, Jonathan, is beyond just technology. You know, money is what Putin needs for his war. And still, to this day, oil is by far the largest source of money that Putin has. And unfortunately, that's been the one area, I think, where the Biden administration has been a bit too cautious, I think, in terms of going after Russia's oil revenues, which are the lifeblood of Russia's economy.
Ambassador McFaul, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but also do the sanctions reflect justice or accountability given that they target people who the administration believes are responsible for Navalny's death?
Well, first of all, Jonathan, thank you for saying what you said about the ridiculous comparison between Mr. Trump and my former friend, Alexei Navalny. I can't tell you how angry I was when he made that comparison. I was with his wife today, his widow. I was with his daughter today. And I can tell you, this is just, you can see I don't have words to describe it. Mm-hmm. The idea that he has anything in common with Alexei Navalny is absurd. And the idea that our democracy and our rule of law system it has anything to do with Putin's totalitarian dictatorship is completely absurd. So thank you for starting us with that. Second, I'm glad they sanctioned the three gentlemen that they did that were responsible for his death. I agree completely with Eddie, I call him Eddie, you can call him Edward, but he's exactly right about that. This was a big new step, secondary sanctions, right? Before, they were always sanctioning Russian companies and individuals. Then they gave themselves the authority to do it. And today was the first step in doing that. That's how you need to shut down the technology that's flowing in. And let's be clear, this is American technology that goes to other companies in third countries, sometimes many different steps through places like China, Hong Kong, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and then goes to build Russian missiles that then kills Ukrainians. Think about how absurd that is, that we are participating in that. This is the first step, but it's only the first step. Next Friday, Jonathan, I want you to invite us back, and I hope there's another package where they're announcing more to do that. And then next Friday, I want you to invite us back that there should be another package, because there is way more that could be done if we leaned into this. So yes, applause for what they did tonight and encourage them to do more tomorrow.
Edward, these sanctions are important because they're targeting Russia's military-industrial complex. But is this as effective as giving Ukraine aid?
No, is the simple answer. Look, I've spent my career working on sanctions and economic statecraft. But I think the most important thing the United States could do to support Ukraine right now is to pass that aid package through Congress. And we know that the only reason that hasn't happened is because of the Republicans. So I think that this is something that needs to happen urgently. Sanctions are a really important piece of the strategy. But even myself, as somebody who, this is my work, I'll confess that aid to Ukraine and military support to Ukraine has to be the paramount objective right now.
Ambassador McFaul, you write about a possible new military aid to Ukraine bill in what you call a win-win-win for Speaker Johnson, Ukraine, and Navalny supporters. Can you expand on what that new military aid package would look like?
So, again, I was just with four colleagues of mine from Ukraine today. We are commemorating this horrible, tragic, barbaric invasion. They spoke here at Stanford, and every single one of them, one was an MP, one runs a drone company, one works for Zelensky, and one's the former Nobel Peace Prize winner. They all said, pleading with us here at Stanford, we need this ammunition. If we don't get this ammunition, more Ukrainians will die. If we don't get these interceptors, more civilians will die. It is a dire moment. And this $50 billion package that has been stalled for months now needs to be delivered. It's a gift to Putin to stall it. Now, thank you, Jonathan, for citing that piece. What my idea is, I wish Speaker Johnson would just do the right thing, right? I know that most of the Republicans that haven't voted on this want to do the right thing in the House of Representatives. They can just get out of their vacation, show up to work on Monday, and do the right thing. But he worries about being removed from as Speaker, just like Speaker McCarthy was. So I'm giving him a new idea to marry something called the Repo Act, which is we froze these assets, billions of dollars of Russian assets. And there's a legislation passed in committee from the House and Senate that says take these frozen assets and now give them to the Ukrainians. And I think you could put that together with the military assistance package, and then that gives Speaker Johnson cover. He can say, I took it to the Biden guys, right? And he said, took it to those Europeans by transferring these assets. And I think this is a win-win for everybody.
I like that idea, Ambassador McFaul. So, gentlemen, let's listen to a little more from Donald Trump.
It's the people from within our country that are more dangerous than the people outside. We can handle China. We can handle Russia. We can handle all of them if you have a smart leader. But the inside people are very dangerous.
Ambassador McFaul, the last word here is yours.
Well, the danger comes from Mr. Trump, who's assaulting our democracy. On that, I agree with him. But we cannot stop China and Russia if we don't act in more unified ways in our national interests. And we need our Republican colleagues in Congress to do the right thing now. Let's deal with November later. But aid to Ukraine right now is not just important for our security in Europe. It's important for our credibility all over the world.
And that is something that I don't think the folks on Capitol Hill really appreciate as much as they should. Ambassador Michael McFaul, Edward Fishman, thank you both very much for being here this evening. And when we come back, Donald Trump's lawyers are up to their usual tricks. Delay, delay, delay. Tonight, Donald Trump is asking for a delay in paying the $83.3 million defamation verdict to E. Jean Carroll. That's as Trump's legal bills continue to skyrocket every single day. We'll talk all things defendant Trump next with Barbara McQuade. Our breaking news tonight, Donald Trump is requesting a stay on the $83 million judgment a New York jury awarded E. Jean Carroll in her civil defamation trial earlier this month. Trump's lawyers write, quote, President Trump requests that this court grant a partially secured stay of execution until 30 days after the resolution of post-trial motions and authorize President Trump to post a bond in an appropriate fraction of the amount of the judgment. And remember, Trump also owes $464 million in the New York civil fraud case against his businesses. That amount keeps on growing with interest, and yesterday the judge overseeing that case refused to allow any delay in entering that judgment. We've also now officially reached the throw everything at the wall and see what sticks portion of Donald Trump's defense in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. Late last night, Donald Trump's criminal defense team filed a series of motions asking the judge to dismiss the case. The motions challenged the indictment from a number of different angles, including, you guessed it, presidential immunity. Trump's attorneys write, quote, President Trump's alleged decision to designate records as personal under the Presidential Records Act and cause them to be removed from the White House was an official act by the incumbent president. President Trump is entitled to immunity for this official act, and that must include immunity from criminal prosecution. The goal of filing the same argument that has been repeatedly shot down in the courts, including by the Washington, D.C. Federal Appeals Court, seems to be to get it in front of his favorite judge, Aileen Cannon, who he appointed after losing the 2020 election. Also new today, mark your calendars, next Friday in Georgia, Judge Scott McAfee will hear oral arguments over the attempts to have Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis disqualified from her election interference case against Donald Trump and his co-defendants. Joining us now, MSNBC legal analyst Barbara McQuade, a former U.S. attorney and law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She is also the co-host of the podcast #Sisters-in-Law and author of the upcoming book, Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America, which comes out on Tuesday. Barbara, congratulations on that, and welcome back to the show. So first things first, I know we have breaking news on the E. Jean Carroll thing, but help me understand what's happening in Georgia. Please explain this next step with Fani Willis for us, because I thought we heard oral arguments last week with that amazing testimony.
So on March 1st, a week from today, what the court will hear is closing arguments. We heard the testimony, we heard the evidence, and so the judge is going to ask each side to summarize, what is the legal standard here and what is your argument as to whether it is met. It will be the defendant's burden to show that they have demonstrated some sort of conflict of interest as to the defendants that would require the dismissal of Fani Willis. I just don't see that they've done that. Anything remotely close to it, because the standard isn't simply whether she was engaged in a relationship with Nathan Wade, which they denied occurred before this case began. That's really not the question, whether there was a relationship and when it occurred. The question is whether Fani Willis herself was personally benefiting from this in a way that would encourage her to kind of keep the case churning. And I don't think we heard any evidence whatsoever to that. So we'll hear closing arguments, and then the judge will either make a decision that day or take it under advisement and make a decision shortly thereafter.
Well, on this question of whether there was a relationship, In a new filing, Trump's lawyers say there's cell phone data contradicting testimony from the DA and the lead prosecutor, Nathan Wade. The Washington Post reports the data obtained from AT&T with a subpoena and analyzed by a criminal defense investigator hired by the Trump team appears to show that Nathan Wade, the lead prosecutor on the case, traveled multiple times in 2021 to the area near a condo that Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis was renting, including one visit that appeared to have stretched into the early morning hours fewer than 2 months before Wade was hired in November 2021. Both have said under oath that while they had been friends for several years, their romantic relationship did not begin until early 2022. Barbara, how damaging could this be for District Attorney Willis? How would she try to refute the data?
Well, the data is really actually quite limited into what it is. Prosecutors would use this to corroborate other evidence or for lead purposes. But all it says is that his phone was pinging off one of 2 cell towers that are in the same vicinity as her home. This is a densely populated area. It is also a location with lots of restaurants, bars, clubs, and other things that could have explained his appearance there. So it doesn't necessarily mean he was at her home. It just means that he was within the area of the 2 cell phone towers that are also near her home. So I don't know that this proves anything at all.
Mm-hmm. All right, Barbara, back to tonight's latest breaking news. Trump trying to pause the judgment in the E. Jean Carroll civil defamation suit. Do you expect his request to be successful?
I don't, although the judge himself is going to be in the best position to make this decision because what the request is that the judgment be paused for 30 days so that Trump can file a motion for new trial or to reduce the amount of damages in this case. Judge Kaplan himself is going to be the one who decides whether to grant those motions. And so I think looking at this stay will be a good indicator of what the judge thinks about the merits of those motions about reducing the amount of damages or for a new trial. Mm-hmm. They say that, the amount of the damages is extraordinarily excessive, the punitive damages. And they compare other cases, and they say most often you might see a 2-for-1 or 4-for-1 punitive damages to compensatory damages. And here, of course, it was by, a magnitude of, 10 or 20 times. But I think the conduct here was also of a more serious magnitude because there was already a verdict for $5 million, and Donald Trump didn't comply with that and didn't stop defaming E. Jean Carroll. And so I think you can say there's a really strong basis for a very high number here. So it's a high threshold the burden is on Donald Trump to establish the need for this and the likelihood of prevailing. And so I don't think so unless the judge also thinks that he's likely to reduce that jury award.
Now, about Trump's attempts to get the Mar-a-Lago documents case dismissed, do you think Judge Cannon will buy his presidential immunity argument when many other judges haven't?
Well, I can't predict what Judge Cannon might do, but I can tell you what I think the law is in this area. First, this argument of presidential immunity, as the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has said, it really is contrary to our separation of powers structure of government and the idea that no one's above the law. So it seems legally no. And I would say, Jonathan, in this case, it's even weaker than in the federal election interference case, because the conduct in that case at least did occur while Donald Trump was president. In this case, the conduct isn't about removing the documents from the White House when he was president. It is about retaining them after his presidency, when he was no longer president. And so there's just no basis for immunity to be able to be a defense in this case.
Yeah, and especially after you were asked several times to give them back and you didn't, and they had to raid your home. Barbara McQuade, congratulations on the new book. And everybody, you can pre-order Attack from Within: How Disinformation is Sabotaging America now, including the audiobook read by the author herself. And Barbara will be back here on Tuesday to join Lawrence live to discuss it. Barbara, thank you for coming to The Last Word tonight.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. Coming up, Donald Trump is bleeding cash to cover the millions of dollars he already owes in legal fines, but that doesn't even cover what will happen if any of the civil cases attempting to hold Trump accountable for the January 6th Capitol attack go forward. Our next guest, Congressman Eric Swalwell, filed one of those civil lawsuits. We'll hear the latest on his case against Trump next. time. That's the one thing Donald Trump desperately needs, but he's quickly running out of it. With the mounting daily legal fees we just talked about, already owing about $500 million in damages, Donald Trump literally cannot afford for the civil cases attempting to hold him liable for the January 6th Capitol riot to go forward. So he stalls. Our next guest, Congressman Eric Swalwell, has filed one of those civil lawsuits trying to hold Trump accountable for January 6th. Earlier today, Trump attorneys told the D.C. federal court they would need at least 6 months to gather the documents needed to prove, they say, that Trump is immune from these civil lawsuits. But the court disagreed with that timeline. U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta gave Trump 2 weeks to identify the evidence needed to make a case for presidential immunity. A March 12th court date has been set for his lawyers to return with an update, signaling that this particular problem for Donald Trump is not going away anytime soon. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He served as an impeachment manager in the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump, and his legal team was in court today for the Trump January 6th civil case. Congressman Swalwell, walk us through today's proceedings.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a delay tactic that Donald Trump knows all too well. You know, he is a legal terrorist, a professional litigant who's been involved in thousands of cases. And this case, which was filed in early 2021, here we are, 3 years later, he is still trying to avoid his day in court. And so he is trying to use the criminal cases against the civil cases and saying, because he has criminal cases going, he shouldn't have to be judged this early in the civil case. Jonathan, I was a prosecutor. I saw this move so many times. It's quite amateur. Some defense attorneys would come to court and they would tell the judge that, they had trials set for their clients in other parts of the county, and they would do that deliberately. They would, set trial dates all over the county for different clients they had so they could go to court and just get continuances and delays. Finally, accountability is coming to Donald Trump on the criminal and civil side, and it's something that has been a long time coming, and I think we're all too eager to see it.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, what is at the heart of this case?
Well, it's about accountability for his role in inciting and aiming the mob at the Capitol and stopping me and my colleagues from performing our duties of counting the electoral votes. And then, of course, the trauma that I and others suffered when that violent mob came to us. I have joined this case with some other colleagues of mine, but also Capitol Hill police officers. And the priority here, because we have not laid out any damage amount, is really accountability, to understand what Donald Trump did that day and did not do, and also just to hold him accountable, for his role in sending that violent mob to the Capitol.
Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who is considered in Trump world a potential vice presidential pick, shared some thoughts about Trump's legal trouble. Congressman, listen to this.
And the left has gone so far as to desperately try to remove President Trump from the ballot. Why? Because Joe Biden's approval is in free fall, and they want to take away the vote from you. Meanwhile, you have the corrupt Joe Biden crime family lining their pockets from illegal influence peddling schemes, the Biden crime family. Yet Democrats and the media like to pretend they are saving democracy. But it's the radical left and the Democrats that are destroying democracy. But we cannot let them, and we won't let them.
Congressman, your reaction.
Well, as a Californian, I'd say that's a lousy audition tape. And we know something in California about, audition tapes. That she wants to be the vice president for Donald Trump. She doesn't look anything like the Elise Stefanik that I knew and worked with before Donald Trump came around. But, she and her colleagues do not accept Donald Trump. They do not. Elise Stefanik and her colleagues do not accept Joe Biden as the president. She was a part of the effort, to try and overturn the election. She has rooted for and cheered on, those who attacked the Capitol, and now is a part of an effort to try and impeach Joe Biden with debunked evidence. And now you have an individual connected to Russia's intelligence services who is a part of this effort to try and take down Joe Biden. They never accepted him, and all we can do, is your viewers and voters, is to just keep winning at the ballot box and bury MAGAism once and for all this November.
From your lips to God's ears, Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you, as always, for coming to The Last Word. Coming up, it's been 2 years since Vladimir Putin launched his illegal invasion of Ukraine. We'll discuss the realities on the front lines of that war, plus what 2 years of war have done to the people of Ukraine and what they still need in order to defeat Vladimir Putin. That's next. At this hour, it is already early on Saturday morning in Ukraine. And across that nation, Ukrainians are marking 2 difficult years of fighting back against Russian President Vladimir Putin's brutal and illegal attempt to take their country. At the start of Russia's invasion, Vladimir Putin's military struggled against Ukraine's fierce opposition. Putin's army failed to capture the capital city of Kyiv, quickly lost ground it occupied, and suffered significant setbacks and casualties. But 2 years in, the fighting is at a stalemate. Ukrainian troops continue to fight aggressively, but their counteroffensive stalled in reclaiming large swaths of territory from Russia. And now, with military aid from the United States being blocked by House Republicans, Russia is beginning to make small gains on the battlefield. The New York Times reports, quote, hundreds of Ukrainian troops may have been captured by advancing Russian units or disappeared during Ukraine's chaotic retreat from the eastern city of Avdiivka, a devastating loss that could deal a blow to already weakening morale. And the Associated Press reports that Ukraine is struggling to recruit soldiers to fight on the front lines and is considering an unpopular plan to bolster troops by lowering the enlistment age for its draft. Today, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer led a Democratic delegation to Ukraine to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky in a show of solidarity with Ukraine amid the Republican funding fight. President Zelensky thanked the senators for their support, saying, quote, this visit is a solid message from the United States and the American people. It shows that the U.S. supports Ukraine. Today, President Biden again took House Republicans to task for failing to pass the emergency aid package for Ukraine.
The clock is ticking. Brave Ukrainian soldiers and civilians are dying. Russia is taking Ukraine territory for the first time in many months. But here in America, the Speaker gave the House a 2-week vacation. They have to come back. They have to come back and get this done. Because failure to support Ukraine in this critical moment will never be forgotten in history. It will be measured, and it will have impact for decades to come.
Joining us now, Simon Schuster, senior correspondent for Time magazine. He is the author of the new book, The Showman, Inside the Invasion That Shook the World and Made a Leader of Volodymyr Zelensky. Simon, thank you for being here. You've done extensive reporting in Ukraine. What's your assessment of how the war is going right now?
I think they're one of the most difficult kind of transition periods where they need to adapt to the stagnation on the front line by finding new ways to attack, new ways to hit Russia behind enemy lines. But fundamentally, the main problem, as you just mentioned, is recruitment of new soldiers. I think militarily and politically for President Zelensky right now, that is the biggest challenge. And unfortunately, no amount of support from the international community is going to be able to fill the gaps in the recruitment. That's going to be a challenge for him to inspire Ukrainians to enlist, to volunteer, and when that's not possible, to take other measures to draft soldiers into the military.
Let's listen to a little bit of what President Zelensky told Democratic senators today.
I know that Americans on the side of truth, and we share common values, and thank you very much that you are helping us to save democracy. All these 2 years, we always had feeling that we are not alone, that the United States with us. Now, of course, we understand all the challenges what United States also has in the interior politics. But anyway, we, cross fingers that we're still together.
Simon, you've spent a lot of time with President Zelensky during the war. He's showing strength, as we saw just now. But how worried do you think he is right now?
I've been surprised, I think, by the optimism among Ukrainians that the United States will come through. In talking to them, they really feel, for one thing, that President Biden's heart is in the right place and he really wants to help. But also to them, the position of Republicans looks kind of untenable because they seem to have the votes in the House to get the support Ukraine needs, but the vote is being blocked. I mean, they don't have the best kind of understanding of U.S. internal politics, but generally I hear optimism from them that sooner or later it's just so obvious that supporting Ukraine is in U.S. national interest, U.S. security interest, that it looks to them like eventually the Americans will have to come through.
Along with the stalled USA aid that President Zelensky says is crucial, Ukraine is also struggling to recruit new soldiers, as we talked about. What are the biggest challenges ahead?
I mean, politically, it's very difficult. I think in the early weeks and months of the invasion in 2022, you had an enormous groundswell of patriotism and willingness to volunteer and fight. The Ukrainian military swelled by hundreds of thousands of new recruits and soldiers, but that was also because there was a feeling that this war could be won quickly, that Russia could quickly be pushed back. Now it seems like the end of the war is receding further and further into the horizon, and soldiers or Ukrainian people who are considering joining the fight as military personnel, they don't really know for how long that commitment's going to be. How long will they have to serve? Some of the soldiers out there on the front have been there for many months, up to a year, without being rotated out to rest. And that is just a difficult thing to accept when you're considering joining the military.
Mm-hmm. Simon Schuster, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And joining us now, Ukrainian filmmaker Mstislav Chernov. He is a prize-winning journalist at the Associated Press and the director of 20 Days in Mariupol. Mstislav, thank you very much for being here. In your documentary, you showed us what life was like in Ukraine at the start of this war, including that horrific attack on the hospital in Mariupol. Let's take a look.
Тихо, спокойно, без паники, осторожно. Вниз, без паники, аккуратно. Выше, поднимите, выше. Маму, дай Туда несем. Держи, сюда.
What's it like reflecting on that, and how does it compare to what life in Ukraine is like now?
When these images were shot, they were so urgent and so symbolic. And it was so important to show because Russia kept claiming they are not targeting civilian population, although we saw a completely different picture. And that's why it shook the world. That's why everyone saw these images. 2 years from that point, they became symbol of all other cities that have been destroyed since then and occupied, Bakhmut and Soledar and Avdiivka right now and Mariinka. So, and I can list these cities, unfortunately, that don't exist anymore. So it's not only about Mariupol, it's about all those other cities that are being bombed right now. And also, what's sad is that until now, Russia keeps claiming that this is all fake, that these people are not real, that they are actors, that they're still not targeting civilians, although every day we see completely different pictures. So this fake news, this propaganda narratives, they are still very, very strong. And I think that's why 20 Days in Mariupol is still so urgent as a film.
Mm-hmm. Mstislav, morale seems to be waning a little bit more now than at the start of the war. How has the 2 years of fighting weighed on Ukrainians?
I can say that something in the beginning of the war, I've seen something extraordinary happening to Ukrainians. Apart all the tragedies that we witnessed, apart horrifying pain that was inflicted by Russia on Ukrainians, I have witnessed, and what that inspired me, the unification of the identity of Ukrainians, the common strength that we all found, and that helped Ukrainians to get through these 2 years. Even when at times when Ukrainians feel that there is no support, there is still this sense of community and shared identity that is always there and helps to stand the ground. And that's what I see every day when I'm reporting Ukraine.
Mstislav Chernov, thank you for joining us tonight, and keep sharing the stories of Ukrainians with us.
Thank you.
Tonight's Last Word is next. Y'all, tonight at a rally in South Carolina, Donald Trump actually said this.
Good. These lights are so bright in my eyes that I can't see too many people out there. But I can only see the black ones. I can't see any white ones, you see? That's how far I've come. That's how far I've come. That's a long way, isn't it? The mugshot, we've all seen the mugshot. And you know who embraced it more than anybody else? The black population. It's incredible. You see black people walking around with my mugshot. You know, they do shirts and they sell them for $19 a piece. It's pretty amazing.
Who is he? Hallie James Almost? I see black people. I just wonder, did he see his African American out there in the lights? What are the lines do I have here? Oh, were they wearing his sneakers? The black people he saw in the light said, as for that mugshot, come on now. Does he think he's Biggie Smalls? Who is America? Please share with your Trump-loving friends these clips. Actually, they might like it. But have them understand why what we just heard is so unbelievably racist, but also problematic for a democracy. That man should never be president of the United States again. You can watch MSNBC's special coverage of the South Carolina primary beginning tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll kick off the South Carolina coverage with my colleague Jen Psaki, and then at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, Lawrence will be back alongside our panel of MSNBC hosts. I hope you will join us tomorrow to watch the South Carolina votes come in.